It's in progress.
What?
The recording is in progress.
Okay, good. I sat with Doris
You
and
ready to start?
Verada. What's her first name?
Ready.
Stephanie.
Okay.
That's what I thought. That, and it was fun. She has 3 kids.
Forgot your socks this morning.
Well, yeah, it's the hip, cool summer vibe I'm hanging on to.
Was that hip now? Okay.
Now you know, yeah.
When I was in
Yeah.
elementary school, I met you were
Well, that
poor
was,
kid.
Oh,
I don't know that there were a ton of alums.
Well, I think we'll go ahead and get started, y'all.
Such a confusing-
and welcome this morning. I'm Grant Hunter. I'm kind of the host of the show, and Dan's the real act to learn from. Just to let you guys know, we are recording the session, so you know, the owl will look to you if you start chattering and have side conversations. I don't know if that's good or bad. It is what it is. But we're continuing today our conversation on the wisdom text. Is that
Wisdom tradition.
wisdom traditions? And I'm pretty excited about that. And we'll go ahead and open in a quick word of prayer, and we'll turn it over to Dan. So, Heavenly Father, thank you for this great day and the opportunity to learn about your word and wisdom. Hopefully it will enjoy it. Amen. Dan, I'll take it away. We also have coffee, so I'm gonna have some coffee.
Yes, thank you. Well, gotta give me a second here because I ate one of those lifesavers and I'm still chewing it. And so, you know, today, this is gonna be a 4-part series. And I wanted to remind you, what I'm trying to do is to try to match it up with our lectionary as much as possible. Now, last week, I mentioned that we'd be looking at the book of Job because I was mistaken to think that that Job would be part of the lectionary. But Job doesn't come for 2 more weeks. So next week, we read Esther. Now, interestingly enough, Esther is not part of the wisdom tradition. However, it's really important to know how it is that Esther was written, what purpose it served, how it relates to some of these wisdom texts in the Bible. So we're going to take a little detour and discuss some of the other, what might be called legendary literature that's also written at this time for a particular purpose. And it really it has a connection with the wisdom literature, but it cannot necessarily be called wisdom literature. It was more kind of didactic literature that they were stories that they would tell or enact. The book of Esther is enacted every spring during the Jewish holiday of Purim. I want to make sure everybody's on the camera here. But they are nevertheless texts that are significant to the time period that we're talking about. Now, when we left off last time, we were talking about the so-called Axial Age. And this was a time in history in which the wisdom tradition arose. You might remember that the wisdom tradition is this emphasis that comes up after the Babylonian captivity. Babylonian captivity, 587 to 539 BCE. This is when the Israelites were taken away from Jerusalem. They spent 50 years in Babylon, basically as refugees. Then a nice Persian king by the name of Cyrus allowed them to go back to Jerusalem. But when they went back to Jerusalem, they came back different people because of all the questions they were asking during that Babylonian captivity. Has God abandoned us? No, God would never do that. You know, there would be debates that were going on, you know. If God wanted us to follow the law, and God said in Deuteronomy 28 that if we follow the law, you know, he will bless us. If we don't follow the law, you know, it's going to be nothing but sanction against us, curses, right? Well, here we are in Babylon. We've been removed from Jerusalem. So let's do the math on that, right? According to that logic, we've done something wrong. But there was another school that said, you know, it's really not that simple. We can't assume that God no longer loves us. We don't want to give up our entire religious tradition. In fact, that's what, you know, what the Israelites who in Babylon come to be called Jews, people of Judah. That's what the Jews in Babylon wanted to hold on fast to. We don't want to lose our religious tradition. And it was down to the wire. It was, just a few hundred people that, were still maintaining the faith and trying to keep it going. They had to come up with new ways of worshiping in synagogues, not in the temple, new ways of thinking about who God was. And this is when the wisdom tradition arises. Some people want to hold fast to the old tradition. We might call it the Deuteronomic tradition, sanctioned against us because we broke the law. But there's this new tradition that seems to coincide with a lot of other philosophical schools of thought that are arising at this time. This is a time that is referred to as the Axial Age, this turning point in civilization, in the history of consciousness, of human consciousness. And if you think about it, 6 of the 7 major world religions, developed in this particular time period, 500 BCE to 100 of the Common Era. This was the time of Socrates, Plato, Aristotle in Greece, Buddha in India, northern India, who was working within the Hindu tradition, challenging it in his own way, Zoroaster in Persia, Confucius and Lao Tzu in China, Jesus, of course, towards the tail end of this in Palestine, the diaspora theology of Judaism, Jews working in Babylon and Jerusalem and in Alexandria, Egypt, and of course the wisdom traditions, the other wisdom schools that we know about in Egypt and Greece. So all of these traditions really ask some of the big questions about anthropology. Who are we as human beings? What is our place in the world? What is our calling as being connected with this broader mystery that some call God, some call the ordered working of the universe? It's the time in which some of these big questions are going to be asked. And in the Hebrew tradition, the focus is on, we're going to begin with creation. And the reason that the Jews began to think about creation was, and I talked about this a little bit last time, one of the ways they had to emphasize who their God was to move away. Remember, we're in Babylon now, was to move away from this idea of a tribal God who was, exclusive to a particular group of people over against another tribal God like Marduk, who was exclusive to the Babylonians, and begin to think about a God who was the creator of the universe. Our God's not just this God among many. This is when monotheism comes into the tradition. Up until this time, it was something known as henotheism. We worship one God, but we recognize there are other gods out there. We exclusively worship one God. That's henotheism. But monotheism is we acknowledge that there's only one God. Now, we don't know what plan this God has for us. We've obviously fallen on hard times here. We, a covenant people in Babylon, we're about to, fall apart. And but nevertheless, we have to hold fast to this idea that this God has a plan. So where do you turn to try to assure yourself that there is a plan that this God has for your covenant community? Well, there is a cycle of the seasons that's pretty constant, right? We know that every spring, the flowers come up, and the birds come back on their migration patterns. Summer moves in, and we plant our gardens, and fall is when we harvest. The wintertime is a time of I guess death, time to think about death, a time of sitting back and kind of taking a break from it all, and then the whole thing comes over again. There's a cycle to the seasons that is constant. And in a world where you don't know of any constants when you're in Babylon, right? When you are in a refugee camp, think of the refugee camps in Syria or in other places in the world right now. That's about as chaotic as you can get. But there are still some things that do not waver. And that is the world of creation itself. We can count on March, when things begin to thaw a little bit, or April. We can count on the fact that in the summertime, the trees will leave out once again, and then fall, and then winter, the whole thing's a cycle again. So this is where the Jews begin to put their hope. And they put together this idea that there's only one God, and that God is the world, the governor, the creator of all, and is the God whom we worship. We can't fully understand this God. But nevertheless, we've opened up a new vista, a new dimension into our understanding of our theology. God wants us to worship in a different way. God wants us to understand ourselves in a different way, in a much more universal way. We are human beings who are part of a much larger cosmology, you might say, that this old tribal thinking is going to be put aside. But remember, there are some Jews who are going to try to hold on to the old tribal thinking. So that being the case, any questions about where we were last week? I'll get a little review going on here. Denny, you weren't here. Have I got you covered okay? Oh boy.
Good.
It's not showing up there. My screen shared the way it should be.
I thought so. I'm gonna take care of it.
Oh, darn, I have such beautiful slides for you.
I know.
Although that slide's pretty darn good.
Oh, boy, I really would like to have you see some of these others. I wonder what's going on here.
I'll come to the rescue here, I think.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Okay, well, we'll just sit and look at that. Lynn. Okay, let's see if we can, see what we can do. But, need to look at my,
Sure.
give me a second. Can we reshare? Yeah, go ahead, Chuck.
You have focused on the Babylonian
Yeah.
captivity as the genesis, if you will, for the change in the way the Israelites, Jewish people,
Yeah.
started looking at the world. The rest of those group or people and cultures didn't have, or did they have a similar incident that caused them to come to the same way, or not the same way of looking at the world in a different way? Or what was going on? What is there an easy explanation for what was going on over that time period that caused all of these different cultures to come to similar new ways of looking at the world?
I think thank you so much. I think the easiest answer to that, and it's very complex. I mean, it can get into the mystical in that there was some sort of, group consciousness that was changing as a result of, past 1,000 years of experience. I think the easiest answer is, remember that Alexander the Great, 332, he embarks on this campaign that goes from Macedonia down through Palestine into Egypt, up into the ancient, what we know as the Middle East and Tigris, Euphrates River Valley, and then even further east into Persia. It gets all the way to the Indus River Valley. Now that empire of his maintains itself for about, 200 years, and trade routes are opened up. And people begin to talk, understand different languages. They learn different ways of speaking, primarily so they could trade. It always comes back to money, right? Economics, primarily so they could trade. And in so doing, ideas exchange, are exchanged, and are able to, people are able to think about the world in new ways, The big one being Buddhism and Hinduism. This idea that there are many little gods out there, in this pantheon in the sky. The Hindus were already doing something that we might call self-reflective psychology. And what they understood was that this world of multiplicity is a world of illusion. There is no difference between me or Chuck or anybody else in this room, but we are all part of one vibrating energy, you might say, called God. Brahman is what they refer to it. However, we each experience that God in our own way. But when it comes right down to it, there is no reason for us to consider the other to be distinct from us. We are all part of this universal energy, all experiencing it in the same way. So with that being the case, what need is there for war and for violence and things like that? So I'm going to suggest that kind of thinking is really what gives the impetus to this. The Orient, as we call it, in the East goes into the Occident, and people begin to expand their minds this way, because the way people were thinking up to this time is you define yourself by virtue of who you are not. This is our biggest problem today, isn't it? You know, anthropologists would say, if you've got a culture that defines itself by virtue of who it is not, you've got an empty culture. What we need to do is to focus on this, and now back to Hinduism, who we are and the obstacles that are keeping us from understanding how the similarities between us and this culture that seems completely foreign to us. So how do we do that? Well, we start looking at the similarities, right? You can start at the biological level. We all eat. We all, we all have children. We all have just basic human necessities. And start working your way up. These are the kinds of questions that were being asked at this time. And I think that's probably the best answer. But this whole idea of the axial age has been around for about 100 years now. And, people have had different ideas as to, but it always comes back to economics as far as I'm concerned. It really does, So remember, there's those two schools that we were thinking about, those two schools of thought. I've already mentioned that in Babylon, the whole emphasis in worship was on the Genesis 1 creation account. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. The Jews would repeat that in a liturgy fashion, the way we, do a prayer of confession or Apostles' Creed every Sabbath at their worship. But the emphasis here was in the fact that there is a mystery to this world that transcends our simple following of the law. That the easy answer for why God does things just doesn't make sense anymore. So you can read some of the literature that comes out of this time period in some of the Psalms. You're gonna have to give me a second because I have to breathe. This mask is making me a little bit lightheaded here. In some of the Psalms, and sprinkled throughout the Old Testament, there is this emphasis upon the beauty of creation and the Spirit of God that runs its way through that creation. So let me just read Psalm 104. I did my best to try to pick it out, and you have it in your Bibles there if you like. A long song, but it's really an affirmation of the beauty of creation and the presence of God in creation. That God is present creatively throughout. Creation was just not a one-time act where God said, oh, look at that, I made that, I'm going to leave it over here. No, this was and I'm going to introduce the term here, a love affair. Not just between God and a people, God and the covenant community. Now the love affair is between God and the created world. A marriage, you might say. And we can see the presence and we can see the love, if we can say it that way, the love of God, the passion of God in the created world itself. So in Psalm 104, I won't read the whole thing. It's quite long, but bless the Lord, O my soul. O Lord, my God, you are very great. And by the way, that's one of the lines in Monty Python that they make a lot of fun of, it's just like, can't you come up with something better than that? Oh God, you're so great. We're all very impressed down here, right? You are very great. You are clothed with honor and majesty, wrapped in light as with a garment. You stretch out the heavens like a tent. You set the beams of your chambers on the waters. You make the clouds your chariots. You ride on the wings of the wind. You made the wind your messengers, fire and flame, your ministers. You set the earth on its foundations so that it shall never be shaken. You cover it with the deep as with a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. At your rebuke, they flee. At the sound of your thunder, they take to flight. Now I'm going to skip down to verse 10. Now we're talking about the heavens, created the heavens, and now we're going to focus on the earth, right? You make springs gush forth in the valleys. They flow between the hills, giving drink to every wild animal. The wild asses quench their thirst. By the streams, the birds of the air have their habitation. They sing among the branches. From your lofty abode, you water the mountains. The earth is satisfied with the fruit of your work. You cause the grass to grow for the cattle and plants for people to use, to bring forth food from the earth, and wine to gladden the human heart, oil to make the face shine. Look at how sensual this whole thing is, right? We have a tendency to disparage the created world, like, this is all going to get destroyed at some point, and God's going to take us up into heaven where we're going to live in our true, in our true capacity as human beings, we're spiritual beings. That's not what this is saying here. This is following that whole Genesis account of creation, starting with the heavens, moving to vegetation, the grass grows, the water gushing forth. All of this is by the hand of God. And it's not something that was, just simply caused at the beginning and then flows along naturally. This is God sustaining things. God is sustaining the order of the world. That whole focus of the earth on its foundation shall not be shaken. You can imagine how panicked people were, let's say during the eruption of Vesuvius, the great volcano, when the foundations of the earth were shaken, right? You cannot help, if you affirm this kind of idea, you cannot help but think that the world is coming to an end because the order has been upset in some ways. But I want to emphasize here that this is not Plato. One of the worst things that ever happened to our Western tradition is we were introduced to Plato. And Plato is about foundation, is foundational to Western philosophy as you can find. But if you know anything about Plato, you know that for Plato, perfection lies in a realm of ideas, a realm not of this world. There is a transcendent realm in which all things here that have a particular form are an imperfect reflection of a perfect form. I'm pointing up above, but it's not in the heavens, it's elsewhere. It's in a transcendent realm. That's all I can say. So, the classic philosopher here, you look at a chair, right? Well, this is a nice chair, right? But that's a nice chair too. They're both chairs. How do I know they're both chairs? Which one's the better chair? Well, for Plato, it would be, there is a form, an idea of a perfect chair that is unassailable, that does not change. And these two objects here reflect that form in an imperfect way. Same with trees outside, the same with everything in the world. We are living in an imperfect world of change. Whereas above, or in the transcendent realm, there is a more perfect world that does not change. Yeah, here's the philosophy of that, right? Here's the logic, I should say. If something changes, it moves, however slightly, from one form to another. That which is perfect does not change because it cannot move from one form to another, because it would either mean the first form was imperfect and the second form was perfect, or the first form was perfect, vice versa. So this world up above us, this transcendent realm for Plato, is a world of perfection, complete stasis, no changing, of which this world below is just a reflection. Now, Bob and others, I know you teach Plato. Have I got a good grip on this? You want to go ahead? Go ahead, Will.
Well, maybe some of us are trying to figure out how Plato's cave and the shadows at the back. Anyone else thinking about that?
Yeah.
Can you make that connection?
Yeah, well, it's in Plato's Republic. Plato was trying to explain how silly people are, really, because what they do, they live in this world, and they think that this world is real, right? When in fact, they are.
Yeah.
It's really a good example of watching television. It's kind of like watching, Plato's cave. See these shadows on the wall,
Yeah.
that are reflections of light. But what happens? And you come to think of yourself as, this is the real world. This is the way it is, right? But what happens when you break out of that cave and you go to see the true light, which would be the world of forms, right? And then you come back into the cave and you try to explain to people, you guys don't get it. That light that you're looking at, those shadow forms, they're all fake. There's a real light out there, and that's what we should be looking for. Bob, I can't help but think that you have something to add, because this is political philosophy, really. This is Plato's Republic.
Yes, but I'm actually thinking more about the religious component. You're talking about this perfect realm where nothing changes.
Right.
Doesn't that sound like heaven, where God is up there and we're worshiping for 10,000 years and we're all perfect.
And that's why I say Plato really screwed things up. Yeah, and it doesn't, and this is where we get a God who is, all right, let's say we all affirm in Christianity, right? 1 John 4. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God, and everyone who loves is born of God and knows God, for God is love, right? Well, I don't know about you, but if you've ever been in love, it's not a very stable situation, right? You're constantly changing. One day you're up, the next day you're down, even if it's the best love ever, there's change that's happening all the time. Nevertheless, you remain in love. Well, is that what's happening with God? If God is perfect and God is love, then his love must be something that does not change, that is static, right? So we came up with this idea of agapic love, right? That is the perfect love of God. But I don't know about you, it just doesn't seem to be a very satisfying discussion. And actually, we're going to be talking about this today as we move into this. That's a result of Plato. God is perfect. If you're perfect, you do not change. If God is love, then it must be a love that does not change. Now, that doesn't mean a love that does not waver. It means that its very essence is not changing. Now, if we read the Bible, we see that that's not the case, right? God's always changing. His love is always like, I don't know if I could even deal with you folks anymore. You're worshiping other idols. The metaphor that's used throughout the Bible is of a husband whose wife is committing adultery. The people of Israel, covenant community, turning their backs on God is like a woman who is married, gives her vows to a man, and naturally, in the Bible, women are the culprits, the problem, right? But she goes out and starts sleeping with other men. It's just like the covenant community of Israelites going out and worshiping other gods. That's the marriage covenant that we're talking about here. So in Babylon, or after Babylon, when we look at the wisdom tradition, we're looking at an emphasis upon a God who is in love with the created world, a God who is constantly sustaining that, a God who takes joy, a God who has sorrow in, in the problems that arise in this world. Not so much with a community. The community is part of that created world, the Jewish community, and they have a very specific role to play. But let's not think that God just loves only people. All of creation, of which people are a part. And that's what we see when we get into Psalm 104 and some other Psalms here. So there is this sense that creation is not just a one-time event, but it's this continuous event. Just like a marriage, right? It's like, marriages have their ups and downs, and but people remain committed to each other for the most part. But again, I want to emphasize, this is not Plato. This is not the perfect world up here, heaven. In fact, it doesn't say we live in heaven forever. It says that at the end, heaven comes down to earth, as we say in the Lord's Prayer. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So that's affirmed throughout the Bible. Plato gets in and messes the whole thing up. That when the early Christian community in the first to the third centuries of the Common Era had to defend themselves, had to legitimize their religion against some of the apologists of the Greco-Roman world, they adopted, some of the categories of the rhetoric that was being used against them. So they had to explain how, Plato, who was an accepted, or Aristotle, accepted philosopher, was relevant to who they were, and they took on those categories. And that's what theology has been ever since, to the detriment. So let's develop this theme a little bit more about wisdom and this love affair that God has. Because there's this really, really interesting passage in Scripture. I can read it here. From Proverbs. All right. Put it in the wrong place. Yeah, here it is. Now, another one of the wisdom books, Proverbs, talks about this act of creation. How does God create? Well, it turns out God has a partner in this. Now, you might remember last week when Damon gave his sermon. He read from, I think it was Proverbs 1, talking about wisdom in the square, looking at how silly people are, right? Did you notice anything interesting about how wisdom was described? Personal pronouns, for instance. Yeah, female, she. And that's common in the wisdom tradition. There is a divine feminine as understood in this tradition. God has a feminine aspect. Now, this is prior to any Trinitarian theology that's being done. There is something about the mystery of God in which male and female are both present and in active communication, love with each other. So I will read, if I could get my glasses on here. I don't know how you guys have done this, but I can't get my glasses from fogging up. So, oh yeah, that's a good way to do it. This is wisdom personified. The Lord created me. I'm sorry, Proverbs 8, verses 22 to 36. The Lord created me at the beginning of his work, the first of his acts long ago. Ages ago, I was set up at the first, before the beginning of the earth. And there were no depths, I was brought forth. And there were no springs abounding with water. Before the mountains had been shaped, before the hills, I was brought forth. Recall Psalm 104 that we just read. When he had not yet made earth and fields, or the world's first bits of soil, when he established the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep, I was there. When he made firm the skies above, when he established the fountains of the deep, when he assigned to the sea its limit, so that the waters might not transgress his command, when he marked out the foundation of the earth, then I was beside him like a master worker. I was daily his delight, rejoicing before him always, rejoicing in his inhabited world and delighting in the human race. And now, my children, listen to me. Happy are those who keep my ways. Hear instruction and be wise, and do not neglect it. Happy is the one who listens to me, watching daily at my gates, waiting beside my doors. For whoever finds me finds life and obtains favor from the Lord. But those who miss me injure themselves. All who hate me love death. So this is a personification of the creative act of God that takes on female qualities. It's almost as if to say, God has a divine consort in the beginning. And at the time of the ancient Near East, there were many creation stories in which the world was created through the, coming together of a male god and a female goddess. They give birth to the world. This is not so much what is being said here, because that idea is a one-time event. This idea is one that wisdom is continually with God as God continues to create in the world. Now, the text here is talking about wisdom in the beginning, but in Psalm 104, we're talking about how the world has continued to be sustained even after, the creation itself. So let me stop there and see if there are any questions about this. Hopefully, you're beginning to see the this connection of creation and love. That creation is like a child of love of God, a child of God created in love. It's even better because, now we've got the same problem.
Hit the arrow key on the keypad, Dan.
What's that?
Hit the arrow key.
That's what I'm doing. I got it. It's not showing up there now.
Uh-oh.
Oh, well, okay.
I'll help you out again.
Is that picture from near Missoula, a river
Yeah,
runs through it?
Yeah, very much so. Sorry, I don't know what's going on here, but.
I probably screwed your mojo up some.
But that raises the question, okay, if this is creation, and then are humans just given, like just part of the plan, or do they have a special role to play in this? Thank you. By the way, I love this engraving. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but you're gonna, it's from the 1880s. Nobody knows who did it, but it's the idea of the scientist looking through. This is the old account of nature, that there was this realm beyond the stars that might be considered the realm of mechanism, where the world and all of its scientific laws are made. And the scientist is the one who sticks his head through the crystal. You can see the crystal realm to kind of, here we are. But that works well. And I would say that what we're talking about here really does have, 5 or 6 steps removed, is the foundation for what we might call the rise of science that happens during the humanist period when the Reformation took place. But it comes back to this: hey, if God's handiwork is creation, God, the movement of creation is wisdom itself, then the true philosopher is the scientist, the one who studies creation. Now, by the end of the 19th century, when this was being, actually, even by the beginning of the 19th century, where scientists had no need of the hypothesis of God. But people like, now I can't remember his name, discovered gravity. Apple on the head. Yeah. Sir Isaac Newton. He entered into his program as a theologian. He saw himself as a natural theologian. And so this is where we come to another aspect of the wisdom tradition. Where do humans fit into all this? Well, it's here in Psalm 8. I think this is it. You probably know this one. O Lord, our God, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens. Out of the mouths of babes and infants, you have founded a bulwark because of your foes, to silence the enemy of your avenger. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have established, what are human beings that you're mindful of them? Mortals that you care for them. Yet you have made them a little lower than God and crowned them with glory and honor. You have given them dominion over the works of your hands. You'll put all things under their feet, all sheep and oxen, and also the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, the fish of the sea, whatever passes along the paths of the sea. Whenever you see that little trope, the birds of the air, the fish of the seas, that's usually coming from this wisdom tradition that we're talking about. So what is the role that humans play in this? Well, if creation is a guide to human affairs, then it's incumbent upon human beings to study creation in order, as wisdom was saying, now my little children, listen to me. If you do, you will live well. But it's not just for individuals to do this. Human beings have a responsibility to pass this knowledge along. And that's the problem when you just throw Psalms together, don't put them in a historical context. But you probably know Psalm 19, yet another wisdom psalm. And I want to offer to you a new way of looking at this. The heavens are telling the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims God's handiwork. Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night declares knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words. Their voice is not heard, yet their voice goes out to all the earth, and their words to the end of the earth. So kind of weird, right? There's knowledge, there's wisdom here. The heavens are proclaiming the glory of God, but there's no voices that are heard. So what is the role that human beings have? What is the dominion that we are given? And that is to give voice to the glory of God in creation. It's not just being good stewards, of creation, but it is to give voice to, we perceive, intuit that there's an order here. The words go out, but there are no words. We can hear, we can see, but we are the ones we are the point at which all of this, comes together. And we are the ones that speak up for creation. Now, this is really quite damning to us at this particular point in our human history, right? Because we've got, a climate disaster on our doorstep. We've not been doing this. And I would say part of the reason comes back to this guy Plato, once again, who led us to believe that our real home is elsewhere, right? This world is not my home. I'm just passing through. Treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue. That old Appalachian hymn. No, this is our home. We are the ones responsible for bringing heaven down to earth. That's what the wisdom tradition is trying to tell us. Now, our lectionary reading for today, and I thought I would just mention it, it still comes back to this idea of marriage. And you might know this, Proverbs 31. Actually, let me stop. Are there any questions I can address while I search for Proverbs 31? Okay. Hands up. Okay. Now remember, as in heaven, so on earth. That, by the way, is tantamount to every Eastern religion. This is why the emperor of heaven the connection, in, let's say in Chinese religions, between the heavens and the earth is usually the emperor. You know, he's the one who makes everything work. But in the wisdom tradition, the heavens proclaim the glory of God. They are ordered in such a way that should be reflected. So now we have this idea of God working in the heavens in consort with Sophia, Greek word for wisdom, Hakma in Hebrew, and Sapientia in Latin. All of those feminine qualities. So if that's the case, that serves as a model for how the human household should work as well. And does not seem to be any kind of hierarchy here where the male is the top and the female is below. But this is where we get the passage that we may hear today in our reading. A capable wife who can find. She's far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. She seeks out wool and flax and works with the willing hands. And then there's this long litany of things that a woman who's a good keeper of a household is led to do. Let me see if I can, she is not afraid of her house. Let's see. Her husband is known in the city gates, taking his seat among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them. She supplies the merchant with sashes. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs at the time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her happy. Many of women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her a share in the fruit of her hands, and let her works praise her in the city gates. Yeah, and that's the end of Proverbs. Coming back to this idea that in the created world, there is this marriage, this relationship of love between God and Sophia, wisdom. So on earth, you know, it's not the woman back in the household doing everything, even though that seems to suggest as much. But this is a partnership, right? In which the dignity of the man and wife go hand in hand. And the productivity, the creativity of the man and wife go hand in hand. Now, I want to get to a place where I want to touch on a book of the Bible that is never read in worship, but it's called the Song of Songs. If you're familiar with it, it's probably the sexiest book of the Bible because it deals with sex. It really does. It's this erotic love poem between between two lovers. It's actually two lovers talking back and forth, two young people who are about to be married, and their desire for each other and how much they long for each other when they don't see the other, and this preparation for a marriage, right? And it's very passionate. Let me just read chapter 2, starting at about verse 8. And the reason I'm reading this is because the traditional understanding of this, I'm going to try this again, Grant. Hey, it worked. The traditional understanding of this is that, oh, well, this is a metaphor for the relationship between Christ and the church. Well, you know, that really doesn't hold much water because it was written well before Jesus came onto the scene. But placing it in the wisdom tradition, it is a elegiac, a paean, elegy to this wonderful, I'm trying to think of the right word, you know, a song of praise to the wonders and the mystery of erotic love. Yes, we're talking about erotic love in a Sunday school class, right? This is what is at the heart of creation. This is what is between God and wisdom that sustains the whole world. So this puritanical fear that we've long had as a result of our history of erotic love is not founded in Scripture. It is eros, this passionate love, which sustains the world itself. And this is what we're reading when we read the Song of Songs. Yes, it's about love between two betrothed people, but this is simply a reflection of the love that we know from above. The voice of my beloved, look, he comes leaping upon the mountains, bounding over the hills. My beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. Note the connection between metaphor here and creation, right? That the hills, the stag, the leaping gazelle. Look, there he stands behind our wall, gazing in at the window, looking through the lattice. My beloved speaks. And he says to me, arise, my love, my fair one, and come away. For now the winter is past, the rain is over and gone, the flowers appear on the earth, the time of singing has come, and the voice of the turtle dove is heard in our land. The fig tree puts forth its figs, and the vines are in the blossom. They give forth fragrance. Arise, my love, my fair one, and come away. O my dove, in the clefts of the rock, in the covert of the cliff, let me see your face. Let me hear your voice. For your voice is sweet, and your face is lovely. Catch us the foxes and the little foxes that ruin the vineyards, for our vineyards are in blossom. My beloved is mine, and I am his. He pastures his flock among the lilies until the day breeze and the shadows flee. Turn, my beloved, be like a gazelle or a young stag on the cleft of the mountains. And it gets even steamier than that. I mean, there are beautiful metaphors being used for, this longing for what's going to happen when the marriage is finally consummated, right? And that is at the heart of creation. That's what the wisdom tradition wants to affirm at the heart of creation. So it's almost as if we return to Proverbs 8, wisdom in the beginning with God. This is a human reflection of that. I'm going to have to give the postscript at some other time because I wanted to just reflect a little bit on this painting, which is reminiscent and derivative of Marc Chagall, if you know his work. Marc Chagall was Marc Chagall was a Jewish painter who left Ukraine, I guess it was Russia, Western Russia, prior to all of the troubles there, came to France, but always painted remembrances or memories of his shtetl in Russia and the life of that shtetl. And at the core of that life were usually these images of people being married, lovers, but not devoid from other aspects of, you've got the donkey here, lots of roosters, lots of chickens in his you've got this tree of life with all of creation seeming to be part of it. And I would guess, being Jewish as he was, and being, I don't know how devout he was, but he was certainly influenced by that shtetl culture. I would guess, in fact, he's got a painting called Song of Songs, but throughout his paintings, he's usually got this couple, not all the time, but it's a theme that runs throughout his paintings. Are you familiar with Chagall? Do you know his work? Beautiful. But I would guess that this is a reflection of his Jewish understanding of Song of Songs. I think that's what has informed him. And if I were still an academic, I'd try to write a paper on it, but that was one of my insights I got from this preparation. Oh, gosh, this reminds me of Chagall. And sure enough, it's this love, this passion happens in the context of a community, not just a community of human beings, but a community of creation. And it is a place, if we go back to Psalm 19, where the words that cannot be heard are brought forth, made manifest in this very unique way in the Jewish shtetl. They can be brought forth in a very unique but similar way in the Christian community as well. But it's too bad that this wisdom tradition has been kind of put aside. And that's what I want to talk about next time, when we look at the way that Proverbs 8, wisdom in the beginning with God, is in some ways undermined by one of the most well-known verses of the Gospels, in the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So I will leave you with that to think about throughout the week. Are there any questions before we go? Yeah, go ahead.
Who's the artist?
This artist, I knew somebody would ask. I could get you her name, but she's contemporary, and she does a lot of. If you look up Song of Songs, do a Google search, she comes up.
It's a great piece of art.
Oh, isn't it amazing? I'll get the name for you. I should have written it down, but a contemporary, obviously, greatly influenced by Chagall. Any other questions? And I think if you're able to buy her work, I don't know how expensive it is, but
Elena Koplayar.
yeah, Elena, what's her last name?
Koplayar.
How do you spell it?
Kotliarker.
I don't know that name. I wonder if if she's Jewish herself, but it is beautiful. But it does reflect just the kind of this panoply, this, what's the right word? The vicissitudes of creation itself, all of its, all of the colors and all of the woman, the gazelle, the turtle doves. It's obviously a reflection of
Does it say what
Song of
she's
Songs.
from?
It does not, but I may not be on the right.
Well, and it's interesting because there's a Hindi hand on that as well. The hand with the eye on the palm.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, right. Isn't that interesting?
You can get that on a copyright for $60.
Oh, yeah, really?
According to the website I was just on.
But it's just one of those things, and I don't even know what the medium is. It may be pastel or colored
It
pencil.
looked like oil.
Oh, really?
The image I was just looking at up close.
Boy, but it's a great reflection of that scripture passage, I think. So, well, folks, I'll see. Yeah, go ahead, Will.
Oh, just a brief answer, but how well would Sir Isaac Newton and other scientists known Zoroastrianism? Would they have known it really well and studied it, or what do you think?
I actually they probably were aware of it in its, kind of Christian Gnostic form, but they're trying to get away from it, right? This idea that there are powers of evil and powers of good working in the
Light
world,
and dark.
light and dark, all of that can be explained by science and should be explained by this wisdom that we find in the created world. So this would be, oh, darn, I went too far. This is a good example of what Isaac Newton was trying to do. This is what the cosmology of the Bible looks like. There's this glass ceiling in the Bible, and beyond it, that's where all the water is. And when it rains, the doors open. But underneath this glass ceiling are all these stars and the sun and the moon and creation itself. And of course, how in the world can creationists think that this is a scientific understanding of the world? It just is not. But this idea of what happens when we break beyond that and look at the mechanisms, the laws of nature that govern all of that.
That's how Galileo got in trouble.
That's exactly how, it's exactly how Galileo got in trouble. Because what he saw on the other side did not agree with what the Catholic Church was trying to say on this side, right? And he recanted, but history was on his side. So we should probably go off to worship. I'll see you next week. We'll talk about Esther a little bit next week, and we'll see if Greg reads from Proverbs 31, and if so, at least you'll have a little context for what that's all about. So, thanks, everyone.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. I win.
Sorry.
And you could hear us, right?
No, the whole time.
If you're interested in any more information about Chagall, I did a preview on him and I had some emails.
Yeah, the other one was-
His life story.
Oh, I know. Oh, I love it.
I'll share it with you.
Well, you and I have that in common, because his artwork, of course, you know, it sets
Well,
for
the other one I was
operatic.
Right, that all down. Oh, it goes on and on.
Yeah.
And he was treated so poorly by his country.
Right, right, right,
So, and they have the things in storage, and everything, and
right.
they're. It's an incredible